Welcome to Real Talk in ELT, the podcast that talks about the reality of teaching English. I did make myself this ginormous oat milk latte because I'm so tired. And I was like, to talk to these two, I'm really going to need some like caffeine or like just a boost. Yeah, exactly, Rodrigo. Like you're coming to fight, and I'm just like, no, I just want to ask some questions.
No, we're so peaceful.
You guys
are. You're just so, down to earth.
Approachable.
Yeah. I see absolutely no problems going into this at all.
It's gonna be like
no surprises.
Exams of like. We could do like a cage fight exam discussion.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
MMA style.
You ready? Go.
Okay. Speaking of which, ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Welcome back to another episode of Real Talk in ELT. I'm here with these two. Prepare yourselves, exam takers. We've got Sergio Pantoja and Rodrigo Sigoli back again. Talking about exams. So I'm not going to introduce you. Everybody knows who you are, the dynamic duo. And here's what we're going to jump into. Can we talk about what exams actually are we going to talk about?
I think we can talk about the whole lot of them.
Yeah.
All of them. Okay. So from FCE, CAE, CPE.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yes,
sounds good.
Absolutely.
Prep stuff. So how do people prep for it? How can people get into actually taking it? Maybe some test taking strategies that are always helpful the day of the test, and picking your brains on the band scores and how those differentiate from each other. So who wants to jump in with prepping? We can do like top 5 tips. I don't know. This is very unregulated here. It's just we show up in chat.
It's totally unscripted, right? Yeah, show up in chat. Yeah.
I don't know if it's unprofessional or unscripted.
This is more unscripted than the Friends as a special, like they did recently. So.
Scripted is nice, right?
Yeah.
Was it scripted or unscripted?
It was unscripted.
Oh, really? How did it go? Was it successful or no?
It was good. But then again, I'm a huge Friends fan, so you might have to watch for yourself and tell me.
Not a big Friends fan, but
okay. Oh, there.
Yeah. I'm out of the club now, aren't I?
What can we do, right?
You guys have kicked me out.
Yeah, Ali, why did you say that? You're about to lose like hundreds of subscribers.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fine. If you don't like me for my preferences, then you can't handle me.
Exactly.
Okay.
Their own.
Yeah, So, prepping. So how do we get into prepping? What's some good strategies, good tips for people to start prepping for these exams?
Top 5 tips then?
Sure.
Yeah, top 5 tips.
Okay.
Well, get a tutor. I would start from that one from the get-go, even though there are so many aspects of the exam which candidates can undertake on their own, such as reading and listening. Even though there might be things related to reading and listening that can be developed in a course. But I would argue that for the productive skills and some assistance on language development, you definitely might need the help of a tutor. And
when you say
some intricacies,
when you say get a tutor though, I want to clarify. Do you mean for a course, or do you mean for a temporary period, or just kind of like spot? Do you know what I'm saying? Because some people they have to invest with the preparatory books, they have to with the materials, they have to invest with the cost of the exam. So sometimes it's really expensive. Mm-hmm. So could they only get a tutor for, 1 or 2 parts of it? Or do you think that wouldn't be very beneficial?
Yeah.
I think it's possible, totally possible. I know people, for example, who have succeeded. They studied like for themselves, especially receptive skills, listening and reading. Then they got a tutor to give them feedback on productive skills, to tell them, for example, whether their listening skills was like what was expected in relation to the exam that they were preparing for, and also to give them feedback on the writing. So yeah, they were not like having regular, classes, taking a course, like a complete course per se, but they were able to find someone that could help them with their more specific needs.
Yeah, because I'm not saying that, I mean, ideally, it would be wonderful to get a tutor for the whole thing, right? Just kind of support
Sure.
you through the way. But sometimes, especially depending on where people start, not super realistic or feasible for people, right? So if they have to really kind of build their proficiency. Oh, that's my next question. Before you do the other 4 tips. Proficiency. Can I be at a lower proficiency and then study my way up to something? Like if I want to take CPE, for example, can I be at a C1 level and prep and improve proficiency at the same time?
Yes, but then again, I would find this process to be very laborious because there are stages according to the Common European Framework where you can take an exam, and this goes into several types of exams because some exams are on a pass or fail basis, like most Cambridge exams, even though they don't use the fail term anymore. They kind of qualify candidates based on the Common European Framework. If we're thinking about the Cambridge exams, if you're thinking about a C1 advanced exam, a C1 level candidate, they might be ready sooner to take the exam if it's a C1 advanced rather than taking a longer period of studies to go for C2 proficiency. And in my experience, and I believe Sergio would agree with me, that it can be also frustrating for candidates because they might not realize that they're going to have to take a little longer to get ready for the exam. Not necessarily because of exam strategies or readiness in that sense, but specifically because of language proficiency. And sometimes we have to kind of be very, very adamant that they're going to have to spend a considerable amount of time studying to reach that level. So I believe that things can be done in stages. And of course, it might be much more rewarding to both the candidate and the tutor if there is a conversation in that sense. There is a certain balance. There is a certain needs analysis in order to take the candidate to where they can be at that moment, especially if we're thinking about candidates who would need or would like to take the exam and have a certification as soon as possible.
Right. I'd like to add something to what he said. When I started working with prep for teachers, I would assume that if you're a teacher, for example, you would know your level of proficiency, where you are.
Have you found that to be true, though? That was actually going to be my next question. I mean,
little did I know that, yeah, most, I wouldn't say most, but there are like a considerable number of teachers that are not aware of their level. They don't know where they are.
Okay.
Now, how can I tell that, for example? Because in the past, I used to teach lots of one-to-one lessons to help like teachers prepare for proficiency exams and have private lessons. And they would always come to me, for example, really overestimating their skills. So they were really like focusing on the exam itself. Like I want to take this exam, in, let's say 3 months or 4 months. But they were kind of, because they assumed that they were at that level of proficiency. So it was just a question of, as Rodrigo mentioned, to develop exam strategies. So they were pretty much focusing on what they needed in order to pass the exam in terms of strategies and techniques and getting acquainted with the tasks. And they would somehow neglect the language of the level of proficiency required, I mean, linguistically, so they could take it. And then it can be kind of frustrating when I think that now after so many years, I'm better able to handle that. But in the past, it was very hard to tell them, well, actually what you need to study is English. So you need to develop your listening skills, your reading skills, your writing skills, especially writing skills, because it's something that like most people don't, get to write very often. And when they do, they don't get to receive feedback very often. Not to mention that when you're thinking about writing in relation to exams, you're talking about like something entirely different, right? Because there are criteria that you have to be, you're going to be assessed against. There are certain expectations that sometimes don't really reflect the kind of writing that you do in real life, but they're still part of the exam.
Well, I have to say, academic writing is not super common, at least for me. It takes me a while to get back into the academic writing mode. Like, it's not something that I turn on and off very quickly. So I imagine, if people aren't doing if people aren't doing academic, that's just going to stay in the podcast. If people aren't doing academic writing on a regular basis, I feel like also that's going to be super challenging because, that does have certain criteria to it. And it is, for me at least, it's an uncomfortable writing style just because it's not something that I'm accustomed to doing on a consistent basis.
But I mean, if you're thinking about Cambridge exams, they do not only include academic writing. There are genres which tend to be more informal, especially starting at B2 level. For instance, candidates who are teenagers, and we've got the B2 first for schools. They are likely to have to write a story, which it's a kind of goes completely against academic writing, if you ask me. And
right, but then they also usually they do have an essay together with it, right? There's usually one that's a little and I feel
but it's
like
not just academic writing.
Yeah, but when I see those two, they'll feel very comfortable doing one, and then the other one is like because of the two genres. I mean, anyways, I would panic a little bit.
Or reviews.
Reviews, yes.
I've already teachers tell
letters.
Me, well, I'm 50 years old. I'm preparing for this goddamn exam, and I have never have I written a review in my whole life.
Sergio, you had to put the GD in there. We can't keep it PG. I'm just kidding. It's fine. Yeah,
but
I mean, how often do we write reviews? I mean, honestly, we just click the stars now, according to.
How often do we write letters for that matter? No, and they are still present in proficiency exams.
Have they changed it to emails yet, or not really? Because
you've got letter/email.
Yeah, it's letter/email.
Okay. Okay, sorry, we deviated completely. So, tip number 2. Prepping for the exams. So find a tutor.
Find a tutor, and I would name tip number 2 as understanding. Definitely, like Sergio mentioned, understanding your level of proficiency. And I would add to this point that most English teachers, like if you think about what Sergio said, that they are not exactly aware of their level of language proficiency. Most English teachers, at least for me, who come for exam prep, they think it's just a matter of learning how to do the exam. And I usually like to say that you can be the best test taker in the world, that if you don't have the level of the paper of the exam, you're not going to pass. And this is, it's like 2 and 2 or 4. It's kind of given. So it's up to us really to develop that conversation, and help them understand that they are at that level, but we can take them to the next level if they want, provided that there is collaboration and patience and all that. So
okay, so find a tutor, confirm your level, and have honest conversations, and don't be afraid to have honest conversations, because really you're just going to waste your time and money if you don't. Sergio, do you have a third one?
Yes.
We'll try and go for 5. We'll see if we can.
Sure. We can definitely get to 5. I think that my number 3 is somehow related to number 2. My number 3 is it's to be open to receive feedback, and not just to find, because sometimes what I see is teachers that look for, and I'm talking about teachers because these are the people that I work with, but we can consider regular candidates to
any test
students.
taker.
Sure,
yeah.
Absolutely. But I think this openness to receive feedback, and not just to find someone to validate what you think that what you think that's right. So I know there are a lot of people that seek validation, and then when they when they look for you and you tell them that, well, you're not as good as you think you are when it comes to, let's say, writing, for example, or speaking, or maybe you're really good, but considering the exam you're taking, you're going to have to make certain adjustments. You're going to have to focus on this, on that. And then some people may take it personal, thinking like that you are criticizing them instead of like giving them feedback on the areas in need of improvement. So I tend to believe that when you're doing something for the first time, and there are lots of people that have never taken a Cambridge exam, they want to go straight to CPE, which is the last one, and they don't see themselves as novice in that particular area. You know what I mean? So they have like no Cambridge background, if you like, when it comes to exams. And they think that
no exam proficiency exam background.
Yeah, and they're going to go
they don't know the exams.
Straight to CPE, and they're going to nail it.
Yeah. See, the thing about Cambridge is, I mean, it's the most well-known, obviously. I mean, there's other tests around the world. We talk about Cambridge because everybody knows it, and it's, yeah. But Cambridge is its own kind of beast, isn't it? It has its own, from teacher training programs to exams. It's like this institution, and you really have to kind of stick your foot in a little bit to figure out what's going on, because if you start,
that's how I feel too,
like right in the deep end, I feel like you're just going to get kicked in the face, and you're like, where did that come from? I don't understand. And it's because you don't really understand how it is. It's like this huge institution that's been around for, God knows however many years. And it takes you a bit to kind of acclimate to that whole, the Cambridge way.
Can you imagine how it would work for candidates who have never heard of the exams and never heard of any of the exams, and they come looking for a course? Oh, I'd like to take that course. What's that one? And then you have to go through the whole process of telling them what the exam is about. And of course, they know about Cambridge, because Cambridge is not just the examining board or the English division of the university, but you have to kind of guide them through. So this is what the exam serves for, and these are the determinations of the exam. Would that be something relevant for your career? If that is, then okay, let's do it. If it's not, maybe then there might be a different solution which could cater to what you're looking for. And I agree with you in that sense, Callie, because it's a kind of a beast on its own.
I'm not saying a beast in a bad. It's just its own kind of entity. You kind of have.
Entity. Yeah, you can think of devil words like that.
Yeah, it has its own vibe. You have to kind of understand what they're looking for. It's the Cambridge way, and it's not bad or good, or and it's not the best.
Right?
It just is that. And if you go to a different institution and decide to do IELTS from the British Council, for example, that's kind of its own kind of beast too, right? It has its own thing and structured differently. It's just different.
Actually, the IELTS is organized by the British Council, but Cambridge does the test.
Right,
Cambridge
but it's a little.
It's actually 33% because there is an Australian institution involved as well, which is IDP. So
but do you see what I mean? It has influences
there's a three-way
that changes it a little bit. Then they've got TOEIC and TOEFL, and you've got all sorts of stuff out there. But it just the real Cambridge suite ones, they're their own. I don't know. That's just my impression. Yeah. They're their own thing, and I honestly believe, like, if somebody said, "Kelly, you're going to go take CPE tomorrow," I'd be like, "Oh, I'm gonna fail." Because I might have the level. I'm not sure.
Would you really? Would you fail? Really?
I feel like I probably would. Waste of money down the drain. No, because I've never. I have looked at it because I've prepped people for it, but I've never really done a lot of work myself on it. I feel like I wouldn't do as well as the assumption would be. But okay, so we got to 3. Do we have a 4th?
I believe I think Sergio's going to talk about that, but I'm going to jump ahead and talk about
go ahead.
vocabulary development, which
you stole his baby.
He did.
Man.
That's rude.
You know,
That's rude.
I've been,
Gonna be
yeah, you know, you're gonna have to take me to court for stealing
Will do.
your line about vocabulary development. You know, so. But I've recently, you know, been finding that, you know, candidates who have been taking courses with us have um, somewhat become more confident in when it comes to speaking and writing tasks because of the emphasis on vocabulary which is placed throughout the courses. And whenever you're thinking about language development in an exam prep course, there is a kind of division between, you know, interesting structures that could be used in terms of grammar, and also a very extensive pool of vocabulary, of course, depending on the topic, and also aiming at the speaking and the writing paper. Because there's all, I mean, you could teach vocabulary till the end of the days to whoever it is, but then you really have to kind of draw a line on what is actually relevant to the candidate, so that they can actually use it. Because, you know, what are the chances that they're going to actually be able to internalize every single collocation or phrasal verb or idiom that that they are exposed to, that they are taught throughout the course? So we've been working on actually selecting interesting pieces of vocabulary to be taught throughout the lessons, which have an immediate applicability for the purposes of the speaking and the writing paper. And we've recently found out that this has been a kind of key element. And you know, I mentioned, you know, Sergio's line because, you know, he definitely advocates for the development of vocabulary, not just for the speaking and the writing paper, but also for reading, right, Sergio?
Yes, for reading purposes, receptive skills.
Yeah, receptive skills.
Can I ask a question? Maybe Sergio, you can take this because
Yeah,
vocabulary is your baby or whatever. But okay, expanding vocabulary, I'm on board. What about the creative use of vocabulary that people already have? Do you ever go into that? Because I feel like sometimes we do have a vast repertoire of vocabulary and we only use things one certain way, and being able to really manipulate the repertoire that we have in a creative way and kind of reinventing it as well. Does that make sense?
It does. You know, when we talk with my groups, we talk about that like all the time, in the sense that when we start focusing on language, be it in a listening task or a reading task, about the vocabulary that they already know, but what they really struggle with to use that vocabulary productively, but it's already there.
Mm-hmm.
So it's passive vocabulary. So then what I try to do, for example, is to design tasks or create situations in which they can use that vocabulary that they already know, they already have, but more productively.
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, as Rodrigo was talking, like, yes, I'm on board. Please build vocabulary, but also at the same time, know how to use what you have. Because
Okay.
I feel like
what good is it? What good is it to expand vocabulary if you can't actually use the, I don't know, and this kind of goes hand in hand with something we're going to mention later, which is flexibility and appropriacy, which are, you know, keywords for Cambridge, because you have to actually be able to use vocabulary which fits the context. Doesn't matter what vocabulary you have, or doesn't matter what vocabulary you're learning, if it fits the context, if it fits the task, then it goes. Or if you are able to rephrase yourself and say things in a different way, then it's even better. So where do these two things meet? What you have there in your storage, in your brain storage, and the things you're learning, where do these things come together in order to guarantee maximum production of language in the exam? So
okay, I think that I have a good tip number 5, which is related to vocabulary.
Did you steal something of Rodrigo's? You should.
I don't think so. This one is I'm going to try to connect the two things here. I think that on the one hand, you have teachers that understand that the purpose why we're trying to help them develop their vocabulary, both for perceptive and productive purposes. But something that I see very often is when it comes to writing, as they've learned new words, new expressions, sometimes they try to incorporate pretty much everything in one text. And clearly, it's something that as tutors we have to draw their attention to the fact that when you write something, there is a communicative purpose, right? So it's not just a question of squeezing in like a bunch of weird words, sophisticated words, if it's not clear the message that you're trying to convey. So my tip number 5 is, under no circumstances should you neglect your writing skills. And I'm talking about writing skills. Because people sometimes they just think that it's a question of using, fancy words, one fancy word here, another fancy word there, one expression here, another expression there, and then they will be fine. But and what they forget, and probably this is something you're going to be talking about later, is that when they assess your writing skills, they're going to be looking at different areas. Language is one of them. There are others. So even if you use, for example, some expressions that may catch the writing examiner's eye, this is just one aspect they're going to be considering. So if your writing doesn't make sense, if you haven't developed your idea as well, if you lack coherence and cohesion, you are very likely to be penalized. Actually, you will be.
And okay, well, you know what? Let's just get into it. Let's just get into the assessment, and we'll think about we'll think about actually doing the test afterwards. No, because well, segue. But how much? Speaking of the writing, because that's where we were. How much of the score is dedicated to vocabulary on the writing exam? Because we have the different
25%.
So 25% of the entire writing score, and the writing score is just technically, is it 25% or is it weighted a little bit differently?
Vocabulary is inserted under language, actually. Goes under language. So language is seen as a whole, as one. So language is one of the 4 criteria. Okay, so what are the 4 criteria?
Okay, so we have language, which is one of them. Then you have organization.
Okay.
Communicative achievement.
Okay.
And content.
So language, that includes vocabulary. What else?
And grammar.
Okay, so it's 12.5% of your score.
Yeah.
So if you start jamming things in, you're like it.
Yeah. It's important to
mention
that
there are stipulations.
They overlap. When you look at the criteria, for example, there may be some like overlapping in terms of, let's say you write something which is grammatically correct.
Okay.
But inappropriate in relation, for example, to the task. So then you're going to have problems with communicative achievement. So when we say language is 25%, yes, we're thinking more in terms of range and accuracy. But depending on what you write, it can affect, because you are using language to write. I mean, obviously. Exactly. So depending on what you write, it can affect, or let's say, for example, that you have a text that makes sense, but you could have like your text could be even better if you had used, for example, more linking words or cohesive devices. Okay, so it's fine, but let's say that the organization is not so good. So then the fact that you haven't used language to connect your ideas will probably, lead you to be penalized under organization. So at the end of the day,
it kind of affects everything.
At the end of the day,
everything's pretty much connected.
Yes. And I would say that in this case of organization, you're dealing with chunks mostly, or with cohesive devices, which might fall under language as well. But then it's the examiner's job to be able to kind of put every little thing in a box. So under this category, this candidate has performed well according to the bands and this and this and that. So, but it's 25%, and it's kind of shocking because Sergio and I have talked about this before. Not only will candidates go for language first and foremost because they want to impress the examiner, or they want to cause an impact, or they want to show off their level of English and etc. But we as English teachers, or myself as an English teacher, I used to look at grammar and vocabulary first, all the way back then when I was a novice teacher. and nowadays there is a very emphatic focus on communication, I would say, the communicative purpose. So I was like, Cambridge has been, putting a lot of emphasis on that.
So can we dig into those other categories? So language we have, and most people are very aware of it, maybe even hyper focused on it. So what are the other three categories again? And how can people approach those? I would say, how can they feel more comfortable and score higher points? What can they look for?
If you consider organization, for example, and it's especially when it comes to higher levels, what people try and do is to use or overuse a lot of words, like linking words and cohesive devices, like explicitly. So you have like a text, for example, full of furthermores, nevertheless, hence, and stuff like that. But that's not the only way you can connect your ideas, for example, by using, let's say, pronouns and punctuation, to refer back, to refer backwards or forwards. So if you're a good writer, and this is something that should be developed, of course, you can connect your ideas in a way that's not so explicit, meaning you don't have to use like all the time, those linking words. It's something that takes a while, because normally when they learn those linking words that can be used to connect their ideas, I mean, naturally what they try to do is to use them like all the time, to show that I'm using this word to connect this sentence with another sentence. But then sometimes they could have done that in a way that would sound more natural, without having to resort to a linking word. But this is something that it takes time, Kelly. I think it's like really baby steps. So at first, some of them don't use, like, I wouldn't say any words, but they really lack words to connect their ideas. So the first step is to introduce them to these words. So you have like all this range of words that you could use in your text to connect your ideas. But then it's not so easy to strike a balance between using them properly and overusing them, in the sense that when you read the text, it's going to sound unnatural. But I think, to summarize, when it comes to organization, it's important to focus on coherence. So your text has to make sense. Your ideas have to be really clear. Because there is something that's, I often tell teachers, is that, let's say, for example, a text at C1 or C2 level, if the writing examiner has to stop to try to make sense of what you have written, this is going to put, or is going to cause a negative impact on the reader. If you have
like, if they have to stop and go back and read the sentence again, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because sometimes the ideas they're trying to develop, and if you ask me why, I would say that 99% of the time it goes back to planning. It's when and this is something I've been really like placing a lot of emphasis on, this pre-writing stage. When you plan what you need to write, I mean, if it's clear in your head what you want to say, chances are that your ideas are going to be clear in your writing, right? But sometimes they start writing, they spend like 2 or 3 minutes planning, because they know that they have 45 minutes to write the text, so they freak out. But then, I encourage them to spend more time on planning, so then by the time they start writing, they will know exactly what they want, for example, to express in the introduction, the body of the whatever text they're writing, and the conclusion. But if their ideas are kind of convoluted, as a writing examiner, you start reading it, and it doesn't make sense, they'll definitely be penalized. So it has to be coherent and also cohesive. So you have to know how to write something that makes sense, and your ideas should flow. So this readability is very important.
I'm going to bounce over to Rodrigo, because I feel like, obviously, writing and speaking, it's right. So should they take the same approach when they think about the speaking test?
Some of the criteria are kind of similar, and organization is mirrored in what we call discourse management for speaking. And when it comes to discourse management, there are some things that we tend to help candidates focus on, and examiners are going to look at 4 sub-skills or a set of sub-skills, which are extent of the discourse itself, meaning that contributions need to be of a certain length without candidates hesitating a lot. That means that perhaps in your lessons we should be working with confidence in terms of speaking, helping candidates develop confidence in that sense. So extent is one of them, and extent is particularly important when it comes to a section of the speaking paper, which is the long term, where depending on the level, like at C1 level, candidates have to speak for 1 minute on their own. At C2 level, candidates have to speak for 2 minutes on their own. So, and the topics are, of course, definitely not that simple. They most of the times include fairly complex ideas to be discussed at length.
And would you, sorry to interrupt
means that
you.
the candidates have to have a very clear organization of ideas in their minds. So one of those.
Oh my God, my dog. I'm sorry, but I wanted to interrupt you because I do want to ask. But they have time normally, right? During the test, they have time to prepare themselves.
No.
No? The long terms?
Like,
I mean,
no.
On the day of the exam?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, they don't. They just give it.
No. Yeah, it's not like IELTS, for example.
Instructions. Yeah, no.
You have time to prepare.
Yes.
Yeah, but Cambridge exams, no. You don't have
So
time to
FCE, they don't have like 30 seconds to read the prompts before they do the interactions anymore?
They have 10 seconds. But
yeah, I'll say something like 10 seconds, but not more than that.
and not always. Like
Interesting.
sometimes examiners will. So it's like, would you like to start?
And then they just have to go. Okay.
Yeah,
So then, oh wow, that changes my perspective. Well, I haven't worked with these exams in a little while. You can tell. Okay.
Yeah.
So then, how do you mentally prepare them to organize their ideas for the speaking? Because writing, they obviously are going to have that time to put themselves together. But speaking,
when it comes to prep courses, then you can definitely give them time to prepare. To kind of organize ideas and think about what is relevant to the task, which is another topic that examiners look at: relevance, how they can sound coherent and how they can connect ideas in a cohesive manner, which kind of mirrors the way writing is done. When it comes to courses and preparing, of course, students can have this time to kind of put the ideas together and then practice with a peer and receive feedback from the tutor. I think the tricky part is kind of removing the support. As candidates approach some level of maturity or approach the date of the exam, whichever comes first. Removing the support so that they can actually perform the task in 1 minute or 2 minutes without having time to prepare, then that's actually the challenge. But then again, I would say that having this preparation work, this background work done in a consistent manner will go a long way.
Because it becomes a little automatic for them. Is what you're saying? Like,
yeah,
because
they can rely on certain structures. They can rely on certain structures, including discourse markers, including cohesive devices, to be able to organize, even if they're kind of lost, so they can kind of go back. There is the buying time thing. There's hedging. There is a variety of things, a variety of communicative strategies that they can put to use, so that they are able to accomplish the task. Because at the end of the day, if candidates have 1 minute to speak or 2 minutes to speak, we don't want them kind of cutting short halfway through.
Right. So. And both of you are speaking examiners right now.
Yeah.
So can we break down the criteria a little bit? So obviously they have the discourse management. What else are examiners looking for?
There is a grammar and vocabulary, which up to B2 level they come together. It's grammar called grammar and vocabulary, but after C1 level, it's split into grammatical resource and lexical resource. So when we're thinking about those, we're looking at range and accuracy, like Sergio had mentioned earlier. We're also looking at appropriacy of vocabulary, and there's something else which I might be forgetting.
Accuracy.
Range and accuracy and appropriacy, but there's something else. Yeah, I think that's about it. So the thing is that they are always going to be looking for the complexity of the grammatical forms and the appropriacy of the vocabulary that candidates are using.
Is there anything like the communicative competence, like the writing part, or because they don't really interact, right? Like interact with.
What do you mean?
If the candidates interact with each other, they do. They do. Then there is something called interactive communication.
Is that the last one we were thinking of?
That's the name of the criteria. So interactive communication, and then it's something that allows the speaking examiner to check, for example, how good a conversationalist they are, if you like, because then you're focusing on how well they're able, for example, to invite their partners to join the conversation, to acknowledge what their partner said, express their opinions. So we're focusing on, all this interactivity between how well you can develop a conversation.
So kind of like the speaking sub skills, that type of thing, and how it connects with the conversation. Okay.
Yeah.
How turn taking happens, and how the candidate can use this can use sub skills such as back channeling, like acknowledging what the other person has said. In lower levels, they use interactive communication to kind of gauge how much support the candidate needs from the examiners and from the peers. Because candidates are going to interact, but it's not a full-fledged interaction.
It's a little artificial, right? I mean,
but they don't have the competence for that. So the exams and the rubrics don't expect that. But they are kind of trying to understand how much support the candidate needs from the other candidate or from the examiner. In that sense, so it kind of the interactive communication criterion kind of mutates throughout the levels. When it's at the higher levels, they're really looking at how successful interaction is.
Okay.
And there's pronunciation, which is the last criterion. Pronunciation is also taken into consideration, but at higher levels, we're talking mostly about sentence stress and intonation in order to convey meaning. So extra meaning.
Pronunciation. Maybe I would like clarification on this as well. Just to be, the Kelly question. We're not looking for pronunciation to fit a certain general American or received pronunciation. We're looking for intelligibility. Is that correct?
Yes. Okay. Yeah. Even the word intelligibility is there. Is in the descriptors.
Okay. So anybody, we're looking for intelligibility, not to have a certain accent correct. Just confirming.
Intelligibility.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And they can even take into consideration mother tongue influence.
Oh.
In lower levels, but but then this kind of disappears later.
Okay.
From the descriptors.
So from what I'm gathering from you two, these two sections, the productive skills, are much more than grammar and lexis. Much more focused on being able to communicate, convey messages, just using the language appropriately.
Yes,
it's there, obviously, like grammar, but we don't have to focus only on that, which I think is one of the big pitfalls. Maybe
I think these two sections resemble real life communication the most.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I mean. It's not that let's test and see how many grammatical structures you can cram in.
No, not at all. Not at all. I think that something that's very, very challenging for people as they go through, let's say, from B2 to C1, C1, C2, is the need to complexify the language they're using. So then they can give, because it's not just about conveying a message. And this is something, for example, that I can do using very basic words, right? If let's say that the idea is to communicate something, most of the time, let's say I can use like basic level words. I don't have to complexify like my to show off, for example. Sometimes I use the word to show off because you really have to give the speaking examiner evidence that you are at that level. So let's say, for example, that you are taking a C2 level exam and then you are using like B2 speaking level of proficiency. So will you pass? even though, for example, you're able to express your ideas, but then all the evidence you have provided the examiner with is at P2 level. You see what I mean? So it's not easy to show them the need to complexify the language, because it has to be a conscious choice. Sometimes I see, for example, teachers that are fluent, so they're able to get by. But then when they start studying for higher level exams, it takes a while for them to understand that, okay, I have to go the extra mile here. Otherwise, I'm not going to pass this exam.
It's the whole idea of you have to provide evidence. You have to give the examiner something, because they have such short amount of time, limited interaction with you. Either they have a piece of text that you've written, or they have, is it 15 minutes on average for the speaking?
12,
15 minutes on average.
Yeah.
12, 15 minutes. They're not going to be able to say, oh, but I'm sure she's a nice person and she definitely knows how to speak at a C2 level.
Mm-hmm.
You have to give it to them. Yeah, you have to give it to them during the exam. Yeah. So can we jump to the other sections?
Sure.
What do we have left?
In terms of criteria, that's it. That's about it, right?
No,
Yes.
So then we have the listening section, and we have the
reading
and use of English.
Yes,
reading and use of English. What can we say? What insights do we have? This goes more, I think this goes more to during the test. I mean, we've talked about the pre-test preparation stuff, but during the test, when people are taking these two sections, what?
I would something that is kind of challenging towards the end of the reading paper is that you have very complex text sequence one after the other. At C1 level, the C1 exam, you've got like parts 5, 6, 7, and 8, which are very complex texts and tasks one after the other. So if candidates can save as much time as possible doing parts 1 through 4, because parts 1 through 4 involve reading, but they are grammar and vocabulary focused tasks. So I believe that the more time they can save there, the better, because they're going to need time later in the paper. And
would you ever recommend them going out of order?
No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't.
Asking for playing devil's advocate here.
Specifically because the paper follows a sequence of difficulty. So they might there is the emotional factor into play here. I wouldn't. I really wouldn't. I don't actually. I wouldn't advise my students to do that because of this. I don't know about Sergio.
Maybe this isn't something that we would disagree on. I've already written.
Yes, hang on. MMA, cage match.
Oh man.
Fight.
I told you we were gonna get one in.
It works for me. I like to follow the sequence. I mean, if I were to take it again, I would follow like use of English and then reading. But I've seen some teachers, for example, benefiting from starting with the reading part because it's more like cognitively challenging, like at the beginning of the task. So they still have like a lot of energy. So that, it may help them to cope with the most difficult parts first. And then, do the use of English part, which is not as challenging. Well, of course, this might be subjective, but generally speaking, it's not as subjective as the reading part. So I've already met teachers who benefited from starting with the reading part.
I think to each his own, right?
You gotta give it a try. Sure.
Yeah.
I always tell people, give it a try, experiment with different strategies, because maybe what works for me, it's not gonna work for you.
Mm-hmm.
I like to say the same thing, and on each individual task as well, right? I'm recommending this one, but it can do however if it's your needs. If you believe that your way is better than mine, then go for it. There's no right or wrong.
Yeah.
Okay, and what about because I also think that sometimes people get stuck on questions. What would be the recommendation? Skip it and come back at the end, or just put down your gut feeling? Do you know when you kind of are like, oh, indecisive? Like, what should test takers do at that point?
You mean for reading or listening, or both?
Well, we were talking about the reading and use of grammar, so we can start there.
Okay, something that I always encourage them to do is to, because it may sound obvious, but it isn't, which is to find the answer in the text. I mean, to be able to like pinpoint where the answer is in the text. I always have them justify their answer. So they do a reading task, for example, then I ask them to underline where in the task they found the answer to that question, and then they share with each other and and compare, and then they need to justify
Show me the
that.
money. Where? Yeah.
I'm like
I
Malevola
like
in my classes too, and they give me the right answer. I'm like, why? And they're like, is it wrong? I'm
Sure.
like,
Where
no,
did you
just show
find
me
it?
why.
Where is it? Uh-huh.
I start laughing. They're like, you always do this. I'm like, yeah, so you should know. I always do this.
Yeah. No, it's funny because the first lesson of the course that we address reading skills. So they do the task and ask them, okay, where did you find it? Oh, I read it somewhere. No, where exactly did you find
Where?
it?
Yeah.
Where is it?
I read it in the text that you told me to read.
Where is it?
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So I think it helps. Then on the day of the exam, I hope that they remember that, because
Yes,
I really
absolutely.
insist on make sure you find the answer to the question in the text. But then, okay, worst case scenario, if they can't find, I would say like, don't spend a lot of time on that question, move on.
Move
and then
move ahead.
go back to it later.
Or never leave a blank.
Yeah, choose the closest thing you find right in the text.
Okay.
I mean,
And how much time on average do you, I'm asking like I'm going to take the test. How much time on average do they have for, I don't even know, to be honest, I haven't looked at it in so long. How many questions do they have and how much time do they have to answer on average?
per reading task? From 15 to 20 minutes tops.
Per task?
Yeah.
Okay.
If you consider, for example, reading parts like CPE 5, part 5, part 6, part 7, I would say, depending on the task, from 15 to 20 minutes tops.
Okay. So 15 to 20 minutes on the reading, and then the rest of the time spent on the use of English.
No, 15 to 20 minutes per task, actually.
Oh yeah, per task.
Yes.
Task.
Like
yes.
if you're thinking,
yes.
yes. But then at C1 level, it kind of reduces a little bit. Like, so you got perhaps 15 only. 15.
Yeah. So then there's an extra part.
There's an extra part.
Okay. So then let's jump over to listening. Can you give us the breakdown of what happens in the listening for people?
Chaos, mayhem.
who doesn't know?
That's it. Conversation done. Bye-bye.
Good luck. May God save your soul. No, because the CA, well, I guess we can start with FCE because some people are still, focusing on that being their first certificate. So FCE, how many tasks do they have and how does it work?
For B2, C1, and C2, there are 4 parts. And
they're very similar.
They're very similar.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. In terms of task design, I mean, the tasks themselves, if it's multiple choice, or they're very similar to each other. So what really changes for one is the level of difficulty.
Okay.
There are 2 multiple choice questions, multiple choice tasks, 1 sentence completion task, and 1 multiple matching task.
Okay.
For each paper. So it gets more and more complex as the levels progress.
Sure.
And each reading or each listening, they can hear it twice, correct?
Yes.
The CD plays automatically twice.
Yes, twice.
So what strategies are the dynamic duo's recommendations for the utter chaos of the listening tests?
I always encourage them to, because they're going to be reading the questions right in advance, and when I ask them to underline, to focus on keywords that they can help them, for example, identify when the speaker in the recording is talking about, like, is referring to that question. I think the reason is twofold. One of them is to keep them, like, as they're listening, so keep them focused, because some people start daydreaming. It has already happened, believe it or not. They're like listening to it, and all of a sudden they're thinking about something else. So I think that this idea of this strategy of identifying keywords can help you. One, like you keep yourself focused as you listen to the recording, which at higher levels can be very long, like up to 4 minutes, right, Rodrigo? sometimes even more than that.
That's intense.
It is.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it is intense.
and the topics don't help. They got things like safari in Africa. You've got
They're not that appealing.
art exhibitions.
You gotta get used to reading to listening to boring stuff.
Exactly.
Recommendations. NPR podcasts.
Okay,
No, but it's similar. I'm not trying to. I actually
podcasts. You're not joking. You're talking.
I like NPR podcasts.
For the world.
Yeah, I'm a super nerd, but they are a little dry. Like you have to really sit there and try and listen to it.
I like the strategy that Sergio mentioned about keywords in multiple choice, and I would also pair that up with not reading the alternatives. That kind of sounds paradoxical, if you ask me, but
I do the same.
Don't read the alternatives. Like listen and then don't read the alternatives that is beforehand, because you don't have time for that, and then you're only going to get confused. And I mean, like between tasks, there's sometimes now you have 45 seconds to look at part 2, and part 2 is a very long one where you've got all the gaps and etc. You have to analyze that. But if you've got a multiple choice, sometimes you have for part 3, which is a long conversation, usually a radio interview, and you've got A, B, C, and D alternatives. Candidates are never going to have 1 minute to read through every single alternative, and like what good is it? You can put your energy, focus your energy on the questions and on the keywords to kind of guide you throughout the recording, throughout the text, and then as the text progresses, you're going to have the chance to okay, so which one resembles what they're talking about the closest, and then you go and choose the alternative. It's really difficult at the same time to control all these things, and I would say there is also a bit of emotional aspect in the listening paper, because candidates tend to get more nervous than the rest of the exam. My experience when I took the CPE was like dreadful, because I had just returned from lunch, and CPE in 2011 was like extremely long. Now papers were 2 hours long. There was like the writing
6-hour exam.
It was a 6-hour exam, and I did the listening for last. It was the last one after, and lunch. I think I had lunch at about 2 or 3 p.m. And then after that we came back for listening, and it was dreadful. And I was scoring really well during the mock test period, and listening was my worst mark in the exam. So it really candidates really suffer.
So this is one that they really need to focus on, reducing stress, because and I also think, I mean, listening is a little tense for a lot of people. A lot of people come and students say, oh, I have to improve my listening. And they only have they can listen to it 2 times and that's it. I think there's a little bit of a, oh gosh, if I don't get it, then that's it. It's gone. I can't. So
they're under pressure. Yeah.
Sure. You know what, Kelly? I tend to encourage my candidates to think about planning, and I'm not talking about planning in terms of the exam. I'm talking about planning in terms of your preparation, in terms of when is the day of the exam, what sort of things will I have to go through in the week leading up to the exam. How will I eat? How will I rest? Where will my energy be focused on, or what will my energy be focused on? Where will my energy be, and etc. So how long do I have to take to get to the center? I have to account for traffic jams. I have to account for this, and that, because every little thing counts in the experience of the exam day. I had a candidate in 2018, and he was getting ready for IELTS, and he was really good. He was going to do a hell of an exam, but he was extremely disorganized, and he didn't plan ahead in order to get to the center. He neglected all these little details, and he missed the listening paper because he got stuck in a traffic jam. And the listening paper for IELTS is the first one.
So did he fail?
He didn't do the listening. So take of that what you will. And he was doing a phenomenal preparation. He was such a great student.
Oh, that's so unfortunate.
It was his fault because he didn't plan.
Yeah, it's unfortunately that he wasn't able to get himself together like one day just to make sure that he could.
And I told him, like, you have to think about all these little details as well, because all these little things add up to the exam taking experience, whether it is positive or negative.
Which may sound silly, right? When you tell them, it may sound silly.
It's
But
ridiculous.
I had a student, for example, who failed the listening paper because she didn't have breakfast.
Exactly. That's my point.
Seriously?
Seriously.
Oh.
She had to go all the way to São Paulo to take the exam. She didn't have breakfast, and then when she got there, okay, she did the first part. When she went to the listening paper, she was like, "Oh, I don't feel very well," and then she said that she couldn't, like,
She couldn't
process what people were talking about. So, and then she said, "Well, I can't believe that I'm gonna fail the listening paper because I didn't have breakfast. I feel like really tired and exhausted. And I can't focus."
Imagine failing a listening paper because you didn't plan your eating or your route to the exam.
Yeah, that's got to be super frustrating. I mean, it's your own fault, but it's still going to be frustrating for the candidate.
Yeah.
Of course. I do have one question, though, because I sometimes do this. Well, I did in the past. I don't really prep people for exams that much recently. Specifically on the reading papers, sometimes things can be very, very similar. And how can candidates, because what I used to do is I used to say, find what's different, because they always had two answers. They're like, it's either this one or this one. It's A or B. It's A or B. I used to tell them, well, find what's different between those two. Like, how do you differentiate those two? Because you think that they fit the same slot. So what's different about the descriptions? How do you guide people when it's like, oh, I'm not sure, A or B or A or B? Do you give them any guidance on that?
One of the suggestions I give is that if they're between two questions, for example, there's always, obviously one of them is always going to be the better one, right, out of the two. So to refer back to the text and look for the details, because the devil lies in the details, right, as they say. So they may have something that's very similar, but one of them, for example, when you read closely the options, one of them is going to have something that's going to make the difference. And sometimes they overlook it. And this problem of understanding how the answer is paraphrased in the in a listening test, in a reading test, is something that the more complex the exam gets, the less explicit it becomes, right? It's not that like they're in your face. So sometimes you have to read between the lines and you have to infer from the context you have. And it's something that should be practiced. But what I tell them is, if you are in doubt, refer back to the text. Actually, let me take one step back here. What I ask them to do first is, if it's a reading task, is to read the question, go to the text, find where the answer is. Then look at the options. Which of the options best, reflects the information that you have in the text? And it's something that they've been using, and it has turned out to be very successful. When they first find in the text where the answer is, and then look at the options and try to find the one that best reflects what they have in the text. Because some of them used to do the other way around. They would try to find, for example, they try to fit the options into the text.
Yeah.
And Cambridge has been working in recent materials. We've been using recent exam prep materials where there is explicit work on what we call distractors, which are these options which look to be perfect, but they are not exactly. So this has been happening quite a lot for listening and reading, and I believe this is one of the things that cannot go unnoticed. We can't leave this behind. We have to help candidates recognize distractors, so kind of starts doing it automatically.
Well, and then also just letting them know that they are there, because just having the awareness that there is going to usually be an option that is going to seem wonderful.
Yeah. But sometimes there isn't. Sometimes the options are ridiculous, and students kind of start thinking, is this a trick? Is this a trap?
Yeah.
To be true, it is.
Okay.
Yeah. Or word spotting,
this is rare.
right?
This is kind of rare.
Because Rodrigo mentioned distractors, and word spotting is in a way, it's a kind of distractor. They see the same word that they have in the option in the text, and therefore they conclude, okay, so if I have the single word, okay, the same word here that's in the text is also in one of the options, so this is the correct one. So they don't even bother like reading it very carefully. And I tell them that 99% of the time, when you have the same word that you have in the option, it also appears in the text.
It's not the right one.
Be careful, it's not the right one.
Okay. Before I let you guys go, because I don't want to take too much of your time, but I do want to dig into the actual, what did you guys call it? Assessment criteria. And some of the differences between the band scores there. So how can people interpret these things? Because the language that they use is quite similar. Actually, I don't even have it pulled up, but the language that they use is quite similar for all the bands. Obviously, like the highest one and the lowest one are easy to differentiate. But for example, the highest and the second highest band, how can people, I guess, jump from one to the next, or know how to interpret those descriptors?
I believe that, well, if you start analyzing the descriptors, if you've got, for example, at C2, a 3, which is a pass for grammatical resource, talks about control of a wide range of grammatical forms. But they don't make it any specific. Okay, a wide range of grammatical forms. Okay.
Yeah. So what does that mean? Okay.
But then if you take a look at 1, which is not a pass for C2, they talk about a range of simple and some complex grammatical forms. So there's a kind of leeway here, because then you have to actually interpret the descriptors. And then if you start thinking, okay, simple grammatical forms, what are we talking about? We're talking about verb tenses, modal verbs. We're talking about help me out, Sergio. We're talking about relative pronouns, etc. We're talking about this kind of things. But then and then at 3, it's a wide range of grammatical forms. And then at 5, which is the highest one, they talk about a wide range of grammatical forms with flexibility. So it means that you're going to be, I'm giving a very general example here, because candidates would really have to dig into the criteria to be able to interpret them. But at C2 level, you're not expected to be using simple grammatical forms ever. So if you are able to use complex forms, such as, but not limited to, inversions or cleft sentences, or the subjunctive or participle clauses, or whatever it is, because they are I would say they are the most common ones at C2 level. But if you are able to use them with some degree of naturality, if you will, and being able to express your ideas by actually using those expressions, then therein lies the difference. Because if you turn to simple and simple grammatical forms at C2 level, this is not going to do it. And the bands work like that. The descriptors work like that. There's always an extra little bit of detail in the next band compared to the previous one. So this is where candidates are going to have to work on. Especially because if they're talking about like vocabulary, they're talking about familiar topics, unfamiliar topics, abstract topics. So this progresses from level to the other. And it also has a connection with using the correct words in an appropriate context, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, and sometimes, when you look at the descriptors, because normally what we have is we don't have band 4 and band 2. We don't have access to those descriptors. So you go from like 1, 3, 5. And even when you compare 3 and 5, for example, sometimes the difference is like 1 or 2 words. So instead of range, you have a wide range. Instead of doing something like generally good. So you even have to pay attention to the adverbs. Like generally, you have something like... give me another adverb here, Rodrigo, that they often use.
Generally, mostly, yeah. Generally, mostly, usually.
Flexible, yeah, there's flexibility. So do something flexibly. So you really have to pay attention. If you're trying to interpret it like for yourself, by yourself, so focus on the keywords that make one different from the other. But I would say that, by and large, you're going to have some things like a range as opposed to a wide range. Generally versus mostly. Like it's generally intelligible, mostly intelligible. And that's where the difference lies.
If you take a look at pronunciation, one for C2 proficiency, which is again not a pass. So pronunciation one is intonation is generally appropriate. Sentence and word stress is generally accurately placed. Individual sounds are generally articulated clearly. And then the 3, which is the pass, removes the generally. It's the same thing, except for they cut off the generally because this is what they expect. So intonation is appropriate. Sentence and word stress is accurately placed.
I wonder if, because I know that you both work with prepping mostly teachers, teacher language development is kind of mostly where you're situated, though you have students who are non-teachers. Do you ever go through with them and give them samples of text or speaking, like the YouTube videos or things like that? And say, okay, so this one got this score, this one got this score.
Yeah.
So let's analyze and look at what they mean by generally and no generally and wide range. So what can we find here? Because I feel like that would actually really help exemplify it for people.
This will help them visualize actually what the bands are and what the words in the bands mean.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it can be gibberish.
And what's expected, right?
Right.
From them, in the sense that, okay, now, because especially writing, when they start the course, all they think about is language. So it's grammar and vocabulary. So when you show them, for example, okay, this person got a 5 and this person got a 3, why? And then you get them, for example, to notice that this person got a 5 for content because all the points from the task were addressed, whereas this person got a 3 because 2 of the points, for example, were omitted. So you get them to think about, for example, what happened here and what they need to do in order to avoid it.
Yeah, I think that's where I would, if I ever got back into language, just did test prep. Oh, I don't think I could do it again. But hats off to you guys. No, but I think that would be super helpful for me to see, because some of the band scores, I have to be honest, when I see them, I'm like, that's not super clear in my head. So,
I think it's on purpose.
It is. I mean, it is. And the reason that they do it too, I think, is that they can give the examiners flexibility, because you have to be, like speaking examiners, writing examiners, you have to be trained to be able to do that. And people produce things, and you have to, based on your competency, you have to be able to have some flexibility to grade them. So
yeah. But it's not easy. Even when you're undergoing training to become a speaking examiner, sometimes you don't get it at first. You have to try it again in the process of becoming a speaking examiner. So because they keep comparing, right, your assessment and Cambridge's assessment, see if you are, like, say, on the same page. But some people don't get it at first.
Practices, yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm familiar.
Of course you are.
But yeah, but I think it's, sometimes we have to, the examiners are human, but they need to adhere to certain criteria, but the standards are tough. Yeah. Any last minute tips for anybody out there listening, thinking about taking tests?
Sergio and I have a course coming on the which is meant to help English teachers who are also working with exam prep to use authentic materials in their lessons. So,
ooh, fun.
Yes.
Okay, so let's. Rodrigo is.
Yeah, it's a plug. You invite me to do business. What do you expect of me? Business, of course, right?
I just love it. You're just like right on the ball. It's so good.
No time to lose.
Okay, so sorry. I was laughing through that whole promo, but I don't mean to. It was just funny how you were.
That's okay.
You were so quick.
So we did a course last year, which was 10 tips to help exam candidates in high level.
To teach higher level exams.
Which became the material for the Breast Diesel session that we delivered.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was there.
Yeah. So it was 10 tips and then became 5 tips. Now we have 10 ways to use authentic materials in exam prep lessons, which is October 1st, 2 to 6. You can find the tickets in our Instagram profiles. Register. Students
is it
who are
long?
former students of our, like people who are former or current
Mhm.
students of ours, have a 10% off.
Okay. Is it a long course? How many hours is it? What's the
Oh, it's a 4-hour course.
It's a
4
4-hour
hours.
workshop. Yes.
Okay. Oh, it's a workshop. Okay, good. Well, now that you said that, I have another question. Authentic materials. Do you find that the materials used in the Cambridge exams are relatively authentic or not?
For higher levels,
Yes and no.
for higher levels, yes, you're more likely to find text for even though they're a little bit like adapted. There's
Okay, so if they touch them, it's not authentic.
then they're semi-authentic.
Semi-authentic, exactly.
Slightly
Semi-authentic.
altered.
Yeah, semi-authentic.
But closer to what we see.
Lower levels are I believe they are developed by the examiners, by the test makers. Yes, up to B1, B2 levels. Yeah, got that.
Graded materials.
Mostly
Okay.
for the reading part, Kelly, like you have text, for example, taken from newspapers and magazines that normally they shorten them. So yeah, like semi-authentic. But then for the listening part, you have like actors reading scripts. And, so yeah, it's mostly for the reading part.
Yeah.
You have something like more like authentic.
Cool. All right. I don't have anything else. I don't have any more questions. I mean, I asked you guys a lot. It was you guys had the MMA between you. It wasn't me. I didn't do it this time.
It's like you're never going to have a bad interview if you invite Sergio and I, because we tend to agree on a lot of things, or you are going to have a boring interview because we agree on lots of things. So it depends on the way you see it. It depends on the way you see it.
I always just ask a lot of questions. Like, if I were a candidate, what would I have questions on?
Which is relevant, because then that might be the audience you're going to have, right? The audience you're listening.
But she was able to find something we disagree on. So kudos.
Yeah.
Kudos to her. Yeah.
You see?
Yeah.
I'll find more. Don't you worry. Well, you guys are always welcome to come back.
Yeah.
Talk about anything you guys are into.
Thank you.
And especially
Thank you
new courses and things like that. So October 1st, we have the workshop. And of course, I'll put all of your, if you need to contact Sergio or Rodrigo, feel free, contact information in the show notes. Yes?
Yes.
Sure.
That's it for us today. Bye.
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 Ready to join the conversation? Head on over to Instagram at Kelly Pennington ELT and send me a message. That's it for now. Take care of yourself, your health, your vibe, and your tribe. Until next time.